Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing Die Hard. It was released in 1988, directed by John McTiernan, stars Bruce Willis, Alan Rickman, and Bonnie Bedelia. This movie is the ultimate example of a Christmas movie. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 36-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. I think there's two major things to discuss with a movie like this. What makes an action movie and what makes a Christmas movie? Those are two very important topics to cover here. And really, what makes a lead for an action movie, right? More than anything else, because this is 88, and the movie even makes references to it. When we think of action films, what do we think of? Like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, right? Of this time period,
right? The muscly, like bodybuilders, like type.
So, after you saw this for the first time, how did you understanding that was the model that everything was being compared against? How do you feel about John McCain?
It's funny because I went into this movie because this movie came out 3 years after I was born, so I probably didn't watch this until I was at least a teenager. I saw like 10 plus years later. I didn't have any reference that Bruce Willis had been in anything other than stuff like this. Like what was it? Was it Moonlighting or whatever the romantic show that he was in before this? And I wonder if during the time if he got the same blowback that Keaton did for Batman, where like they didn't see him in that role.
Right.
Now I think we're a little bit more used to it now because obviously, we have like Taken and even with like John Wick with Keanu Reeves. Well, I guess Keanu Reeves had technically been in an action movie or two before that, but like it's not unusual to have a out of typecast actor in a movie like this. But
right
during the 80s, because 80s were, Predator, right? Mm-hmm. The director's previous movie or whatever, like it was that to me was a quintessential 80s movie. But then you would also have like, if you think about it, this is also, the Clint Eastwood era too.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't necessarily fit into that macho, but he kind of is in a way, but he's like grouchy macho.
Right.
But he's definitely not the type that I'm really afraid he's going to be able to, break me in half.
Right.
Like, Schwarzenegger would be.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely, I imagine, had to have at least some like, really? Bruce Willis? Really? Whenever this probably came out.
He started off afraid of having a difficult time with the plane. And of course, it was a brilliant setup to have no shoes, but they did start him off like not, some of the other movies might start him off like as like being some kind of hero in some huge action sequence. But this kind of started off opposite with kind of like a disadvantaged situation.
Well, the commentary on flying and travel, if you've done it enough, I guess my first question is the idea of rubbing your bare feet on hotel carpet, does that really sound that pleasurable? Because that sounds like the grossest thing you could possibly
it's funny, like we're literally talking about like the first like minute of this movie, but like to this day, as a frequent flyer, I don't understand what it was solving. Like I get if he was terrified of flying, if he got like air sick or something, but like what was that going to solve half an hour to an hour afterwards doing that? Like I still do not understand what it was fixing.
So what you're telling me is you've never tried it?
No, I've tried it, but I still don't. I'm not in a hotel carpet, in my own carpet or whatever. But I like I'm sitting there like, okay, well, this is interesting, but like, what is this solving? Anxiety, maybe? I guess.
I'm guessing that or to make you feel like you're home or that you're grounded back on the planet. Nevertheless, so I'm hearing you described. You saw it later, Matt. Bobby, I don't know if you saw it in real time. I definitely did not. I had no perspective of this, and I probably saw this for the first time in my 20s. It was a long time after the movie came out.
Yeah.
And it was one of those where I just remember leaving the film going, why didn't anyone tell me about this movie? Like, that's how I felt because of what I described, up front for me. our quintessential action hero was Arnold, right? And it was seeing him just like dominate the screen in all the ways that we're used to, and to get to the choppa, and then all that stuff is so valuable. And then watching this, you're going, wait a second, the pacing feels different. It's not so much about the machismo, but much more like I've all the action pieces, everything they did. It's so fun to watch.
Yeah, it's so well done. Like, I think the cinematography is really good. Obviously, John DeBont did it, who then went on to do Twister and a bunch of other stuff. So there was a lot of skill behind the movie, and it's just very tight. Like, it seems like each scene is a setup and a payoff, and I think it just moves really well, and it's engaging. I think Bruce Willis did a great job, and I think it's neat how it's like a contained, like there's a lot of movies these days where it's like, oh, this is, they refer to this movie like, oh, this movie is now like Die Hard on a boat, or Die Hard like wherever it is.
I think that containment definitely plays a part, because I felt claustrophobic at times and was thinking about how they were filming in stairwells and these more cramped areas for everything that they were setting up throughout it. You're right. Thinking of other films, was Speed, Died Hard on a Bus? Is that the same?
Yeah,
going along the same lines there.
And I think it was clever to have the building be under construction so that you're not constantly going through like office type situations. You have construction zones, which seem to be like inherently more dangerous because there's more junk just kind of like hanging around, and saws and that kind of stuff, and not just like, oh, here's another desk with some paperwork on it and a computer.
Well, they get into all the stuff really quick too, right? Because we do meet him. He's getting off the plane, and surprise limo, straight to building, surprise party. Then like the action starts, because you get the big truck coming in. And was it a Mercedes that the crew came in on? The two guys. What kind of car was that?
I think so.
I don't remember.
I think it might have been. I mean, it would kind of tie into, the Hans Gruber. Like most of them were German, so.
And then they come in and just start like raising hell, right? How did you feel about the setup of the bad guys and really their whole element and their goals?
It's funny because now in movies, it's not that unusual to see the by the minute planning that you would have criminals kind of come in, and they're very organized. They're very each of them are doing a specific task, and they're literally like you have the leader who's checking his watch to make sure they're still on time. So the introduction of them, it does what I think it's supposed to do, which tells you they're very well informed. They're very organized. They're very, it's the same thing that, McClane was telling Al, right? These guys aren't amateurs. And you definitely get that feeling very early on that they're not clumsy. They're not, the only thing that I guess kind of tells you a little bit about them is, I can't remember, was it Carl, where like he hacks the phone line, even though the other guy, his brother wasn't quite done yet. It tells you about the characters fairly early on without having to do much exposition, which is genius, script writing, that you're able to inform your audience what you need to know about John McClane, about his wife, the way that they interact, without having to go out of the way of, specifically telling you a lot of the things. I mean, was it Ellis? You know everything about Ellis within 5 words of him talking. You know everything about Takagi, the way that his mindset is within a few words of him talking. Hans, all of them, you are able to get a grasp, whether it means that they're just that one dimensional or not. I can't really say, but you at least know what to expect from them pretty early on. And so as the movie plays out, you get to reinforce, that mindset as you go, and it plays into the plot. So Carl is, very rambunctious. He doesn't seem to want to follow the rules. And sure enough, throughout the movie, he's the character that doesn't want to follow the rules. And, going into it, obviously, with, his brother, it just kind of, expedites it. I do kind of feel like maybe they could have shown a little bit more of their relationship earlier as to show why he was so mad later. But did that really, I mean, the fact that they said they're brothers, I think kind of helps, because you are able to imply, as opposed to if they were just, because a lot of these guys get taken out Carl doesn't seem to care. So,
Right.
you can't just say it's because they're coworkers. So,
Well, you made me think, is there a prequel here that could have shown us the life of the heist that these people pulled off before this one that just went wrong when they ran into the wrong New York City cop who happened to be in LA? So like some Scooby-Doo crap right there. If it wasn't for that damn John McClane. How'd you feel about this may sound weird, but they kind of pivoted it to being like a buddy cop thing between Al Powell and John McClane, right? Even though they weren't in the same zone, they like built an affection for each other through it.
Yeah, they were like best friends when they were embracing each other at the end.
Did it make sense?
I was thinking about it as I was watching it, and the more it went on, the more I think that it did a couple different things. One, it helped with some of the exposition to kind of move, because the one thing I'll give this movie credit for is it doesn't really slow down too much, but it also doesn't like Fast and Furious it, where they're trying to like constantly cram stuff down where it becomes exhausting, where it's just nonstop action. So I think during those moments where it probably would have been slow, that interaction kind of helped still drive it. And especially the kind of camaraderie that you felt especially once Al kind of realized that he was a fellow police officer on the other side. I think that kind of helped form that connection a little bit more, especially when it came to, the situation. Because obviously you had the chaos on the inside and then the chaos on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had those two sides kind of communicating. And in a way, it almost acts like nowadays we have like reaction channels on YouTube where people react to movies and TV shows and stuff like that. I kind of feel like having those two kind of drove that same sort of thing. So they were providing commentary to what was going on their perspective sides.
But from the, understanding what they built together, Al kind of represents the only level-headed person when they show these groups of authority between both the police and the FBI.
Right.
Why did they make everyone else such an idiot?
Because it's just like plot, right? If all of the SWAT teams and everything else were competent, would there be much of a movie at that point?
And how did they have their own dedicated channel, just like McClane and Al?
They didn't.
No, it was open. Everyone could hear it.
But he was the only one who like responded.
Which was also something that drove me a bit bonkers.
Mm.
He was basically like, I only want to talk to this guy. Anybody else?
Oh, you meant the fact that
that he was allowed to.
Yeah.
No, completely. Yes, all right, I want the protocol movie. I think one of the notes I took down is like, I hate all this lack of protocol and love of it at the same time, because it was kind of like Al was being chastised to follow protocol, but then at the same time being yelled at. I don't know. It was always like they were balancing between the two. It's like, which is it? Do you want them to do it the right way or not?
I think like movies like this, like I have no idea like what cops actually do, like
I think anyone listening to us could probably guess we don't actually know. I'm sure there's a YouTube video for that.
Well, and I do wonder, because like obviously, we live in an era now where there's a lot of visibility to that world in a way, like the real world part. Because that's the thing, right? Is you have the fictional version of police officers that exist on, Law and Order and movies like these. And then you have the reality of it, right? You have the reality of cops' more mundane lives, the controversy, everything that might exist out there. And so during this time, just the reaction to a situation like this, right? At no point did they actually ever bring in a real negotiator ever. And this is LA. This isn't like this is some place that was like, oh, we're not prepared for that. This is still Los Angeles in the 80s. This is still, within a decade of an era of a lot of terrorism in the world or whatever, where, hijackings were a normal thing. This is still during, the era of a lot of situations like that. So it's not like there should have been a negotiator who should have showed up at some point. So it does kind of drive home the fact that it feels like there's maybe not necessarily like the love that you get from like Dick Wolf on like Law and Order, but there's still an appreciation for police officers, because obviously the lead character is, the buddy character is, but then you have the complete buffoonery of the FBI and the rest of the police. So it's kind of like the dichotomy that, you know, the director was kind of going through here.
And I like how the group like intentionally used the cops, like, oh great, they're here now they can cut off the power, or like they were in control of everything and used everything to their will.
Well, that's part of the planning, right? That Hans sets up. But it makes you wonder, and I think, you know, we were thinking about this, especially in terms of today's technology. What did they need the codes on the computers for if they were just going to brute force the entire thing to get through what was 7 locks that they needed to pierce through?
Might as well try, I guess, right? Oh, this guy's a wimp. He gives us all the codes. Now we get to leave, you know, like. Even
then, like, because the one I was curious about, so I kind of read up on it, because I was very interested in it. Was like Takagi lying, or, you know, was it very much kind of like a bank vault where it's like there's 2 keys, right? It's kind of like that nuclear, like, you know, where you have the 2 keys you have to turn or whatever. And from what I can tell, it seems like that is the case, where he only had half the passcode. Like one of the CEOs in Tokyo probably had the other half. So it's like, even if you got his part, it wasn't going to matter. But yeah, within 5 minutes, they cracked his password anyways. What was it, Red Castle or whatever?
Isn't there like a panic code too, where if you enter like the wrong, like a certain code, it can lock everything down? Like you tell them, oh, here's what the code is, and it's the wrong code, and it messes everything up.
I mean, we definitely have all that today. Now, whether or not it was on this machine, I guess I would hope so. You know, minus the fact that they could drill through it.
Yeah.
Wasn't that in Ocean's 11 too, where they were drilling through? No? Am I confusing my movies?
They needed the pinch.
That's exactly what they needed the entire time. Well, I mean, these guys rigged the entire building with, you know, all the explosives to essentially bring it down, even though it didn't. The second thing I mentioned in the beginning, action movie wise, you mentioned the pacing is good and it kind of goes from beat to beat. I feel like there was only one part where I was like, man, the gunfire is going for an eternity.
Oh yeah, no, like during the glass.
It was never ending. But overall, from like when you compare it to those other films, because we talked about the hero element that we know from our actors, thinking of Arnold, thinking of Stallone and Bruce, just as an action film, when you compare it to those others, did you end up leaning in a way that you were saying, you know, maybe Die Hard is winning out over some Arnold films? Or how did you feel at the time, thinking, you know, here we are, it's the 80s. Did this come out on top for you there?
I mean, I think the one thing that this has the advantage of is like what we were talking about before. I mean, like with the Arnold stuff, he's like so big, and you know, like he's so like, he's such a force that whoever he goes up against, it's like you're pretty sure he's winning that fight, right? But with this, I mean, you know he's gonna win anyway, but at least it kind of seems like there's a possibility he might not.
Because he represents the everyman somehow?
Yeah.
Well, he gets hurt, right? And it's believable that, because this is always the problem, right? Is like you're fairly confident that the lead character is going to survive by the end. Now you can compensate for that by either having the potential of, you know, in this case, Holly, you know, somebody who's close to them that is vulnerable compared to the main character. You don't know if they're going to make it.
Which I kind of want to point out as you say that. It's interesting how long they did wait to reveal the vulnerability.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that it was revealed through the friggin' press.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Whereas I think like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and, you know, nowadays you have like Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel that refuse to, you know, get beaten on screen. It's part of their contracts.
Right.
So to have a character like this who does get, I mean, my wife went to school for costume design, and they have an entire section about John McClane's outfit in this and how it's aged. You know, how it goes from a white t-shirt to basically brown and gray and stuff like that by about the midpoint of the movie, the blood stains and everything else. So there's a lot of wear and tear that happens on him. So it tends to be more suspenseful compared to if I look at this compared to this is probably closer to, and it's funny because in my mind, if you tell me Rambo, I think more Rambo 2 and 3 version of Stallone But Rambo 1, he was a little bit more, like, yeah, he was a fighting machine, but he wasn't a huge fighting machine. He was just kind of like a dude, who was just using a lot of Macaulay Culkin traps and stuff like that. Using his hunting skills and his trapping skills to kind of get by. So it's a little bit more comparable to that, but this is the same era as like RoboCop. I think that as far as like pure action, I don't think that is probably the best action movie of the 80s, but as far as like a competent, well-made movie, I would probably put this at the top, just because it does have very good script writing and story that pays off throughout, all the way. I don't know why it never really clicked with me until Bobby brought up the watch at the end. I was like, oh yeah, that was a payoff for the stupid watch. Okay.
Right.
Like literally this is not at the same level as Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz is still probably the best movie for, setup and payoff that I've ever seen. But this is up there. This is well written. And so I think it balances it out. But, are there action movies? Is Predator potentially a better action movie? Probably. There's probably better action sequences in it. RoboCop, another good example of a really good action movie from that era. So, I think that there's contenders, but for like, bang for your buck, this is definitely at the top.
Is Home Alone Die Hard in a house?
Yes, it is. Honestly, it might be crueler in Home Alone because at least John just shot them. Macaulay Culkin tortured those two men.
Right.
Two things. Are we happy that Holly McClane found the love for her husband only by the thought that she might have lost him in this battle?
Right. I thought that was pretty funny how she's like, only he could get somebody that mad.
Well, it's funny too, because this is where sequels play a part whenever I watch this movie. So, I actually enjoy Die Hard with a Vengeance almost as much as this movie. And in those ones, they're separated, right? Spoiler alert if you haven't seen those ones yet after 30 plus years. So it kind of, you go through this whole thing. It's almost, what was the Helsinki syndrome that the one professor or whatever was talking about on TV during this, in Finland. I do wonder if just the stressful situation just kind of rekindled it. And then like a week later, they were already split up again. They're like, oh yeah, that's right. We still live in two different cities and you're not, well, I don't know. Did she move? Cause that building blew up. So,
right.
What was her job after this?
She's like, I got to stay here and clean up this mess.
Well, she said she became the boss because they got rid of Takagi. That's a hell of a promotion path. She set up this whole thing. That's what we just learned. This was all her setting up. I have to go here now, down the Home Alone path. What makes a Christmas movie?
Oh, you mother.
Well, there's got to be terrorists. There's got to be a building.
Matt has some rules, and some things were broken, and maybe some things apply. But I think I have a strong feeling that, Matt, a Christmas movie for you is more about a vibe, and this is just an action film that happens to take place around Christmas. A lot.
So it's funny that it's even it's a debate, right, in the community, that people have taken sides on it, that it's become a conversation about whether it counts as a Christmas movie. Because to me, anytime somebody brings this up as a Christmas movie is whenever you ask a dude, like, what's your favorite Christmas movie? Die Hard. It's almost like they're afraid to list an actual like Christmas themed movie. It was kind of like,
it's a joke because no one's going to sit around with their kids and their family and be like, hey, what do you want to watch?
I disagree completely, because by your logic, what you're saying right now is anything you watch during Christmas is a Christmas movie, because it now falls under the criteria of it's something you can sit down and watch with your family.
The one problem with this movie is young kids can't watch this movie. Like, how many other Christmas movies are there?
Now you're killing me, because the idea for you, a Christmas film, is that a child should be able to watch it. So what is Krampus?
I don't mean only a child. I mean, like, it's Christmas Day. Like, we have a little bit of time. We've done the presents and stuff. We have a little bit of time before we do dinner. Like, let's throw on a movie as a family. It's not going to be Die Hard.
But see, like, you're seeing it from that perspective. Like that's what I love about our little interactions that we have here, because you see it from a family perspective. I'm just married with a cat or whatever. So like,
Mhm.
I don't have kids to sit down with, so I don't have to consider that. Right. So that aspect of, traditionally to me, like a Christmas movie is more about the idea of the Christmas spirit within the movie rather than just the setup scenario. So it's like, technically, can you have a movie that's about Christmas in Las Vegas? Yeah. Even though you won't have snow, even though it's probably traditionally not like when you think of Christmas, it's almost always New York for some reason, or some rural town on the East Coast. Very rarely is it a Christmas, in, San Clemente, right?
Right.
It's very rarely that.
Right. It's because it looks more like what you would think about Christmas.
Yeah,
like more winter,
it's got
more
snow,
pine trees, more snow. Yeah.
Exactly. But I do think that you can still qualify as a Christmas movie as long as it has some aspect of the Christmas spirit in it, like the idea of Christmas spirit. So, goodwill to all men, all that kind of shit, even gift giving, just the basic idea of it. I know going into this, I had my rules that I made up, which was there has to be snow. Somebody has to say Merry Christmas. And what was my third one?
Santa Claus.
Oh yeah. Santa Claus has to be somewhere in it. Like technically this one met 2 out of 3 of them. Somebody said that, and then if we wanted to
multiple Merry Christmases, we had Santa Claus.
There was a Santa Claus figure or whatever. There wasn't one at the party, as far as I can tell, which would have been hilarious if there was one at the party and he had like you followed the Santa Claus throughout the whole hostage situation. Would have been hilarious. But then we didn't have snow, but we did have the raining paper, which was kind of like snow, which might have honestly been the intention of that. We did have lights. So technically it, to some level, might qualify as a Christmas movie, but it doesn't have that thing that would make it like a Hallmark movie where like it has like, Jingle All the Way, Christmas movie. Yeah. Gremlins, I'll make an argument, is a Christmas movie because it takes place during Christmas. There's snow, Merry Christmas, Gizmo is given as a gift. There's a whole concept through this. This doesn't have that spirit to it. So if we're taking a vote, if you have to choose a side of the argument, and people can dislike this, but it's not a Christmas movie.
She's gifted a watch. They fall back in love again. What is more the Christmas spirit than them coming back together at the end of hardship?
She is gifted a watch as a bonus for a job well done. That could happen at any time of the year. See, and this is the problem. This is my problem with it. And because I think a couple other movies try to kind of fit into this category of it's a thing that happens during Christmas. It could have happened. Like there was nothing about this movie. You could have removed the Christmas aspect of it and it wouldn't have changed that drastically. He would have written something else. He wouldn't have written ho ho on the shirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything else would have been mostly the same. And I think
Happy
that's
4th of July.
It was fiscal year end. They were celebrating a big closing, and it happened during the holidays and Christmas, and they were all jolly, minus them not playing the Christmas music. We got Christmas music in the limousine. All right. Let it run. We are clearly on the 2-1 here on this Die Hard as Christmas. So I think it's time. We'll go around. 36 years later, Bobby, are you recommending Die Hard?
Yeah, I mean, this is, in my mind, one of the better action movies. I mean, I think it's clever, it's smart. I do think it's worth watching for a little bit of a different take. And, I mean, a lot of movies like build off of this one. So if you watch this one, you might realize that's where this came from. It came from this movie. I just remembered more. There's a couple of movies that are Die Hard in the White House.
It definitely has that legacy, right? Of like you said, people learning from this and pivoting off of it, and not everything turning into Arnold. Matt, you recommending Die Hard?
As an action movie, yes. As a Christmas movie, I mean, for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, it's well paced. It's well written. The characters are well defined and unique from each other. Even the generic goons. There's a couple of them that stand out, which is pretty rare, right? It's not just Hans. Hans and Alan Rickman get a lot of credit, but even the generic goons are standoffs, for what they are. Is it a perfect movie? No, but I think that for the Hall of Fame of action movies and the honorable mentions for Christmas movies, it's a good watch. So
yeah, this is definitely hard to pass up, and one that I hope is in sort of the family legacy as we talk about that adults are passing on to their kids. Is like, let's show you all the cool action movies from the 80s, and this gets thrown in there, and we taking that step back from thinking of just the Arnolds and the Stallones, and understanding that we can get these types of films in a way that we didn't expect. And again, this movie fell under one that surprised me then, and even now, rewatching it, re-reviewing it, it's fantastic, and absolutely 100% recommend. Get the popcorn out, watch it with the family when they're a little bit older, so that way everyone can appreciate a pseudo Christmas spirit of sorts. All right. Before I'm burned in effigy, as always, thank you for listening, and light 'em if you got 'em.